The story I'd like to share with you was a story that was shared by Chief Ian Campbell, our Siam, our chief from the Sko'omisholmoch. And this story is one of those stories that really makes you think. And to be honest, I share this story all of the time because it just really draws me in and really makes me think about who we are as human beings. It actually happened long, long ago. And it was a time when all of the Tachel milk, all of the skull milk, the humans, the animals, we all lived together in the forest. And it was a beautiful spring day. The sun was out, everybody was working, getting their jobs done. But of course, there was one animal, he was not working. That was Raven. Raven hardly ever worked at all. He was perched up on the tree branch, and while people were getting their work done, he was distracting everybody, trying to get their attention, always being the center of attention. But no one paid attention to Raven. They knew that he wasn't a worker. Nonetheless, he was very persistent, and he was coming up with ideas, and he was thinking of schemes to distract people and to get them to listen to him. But they kept on working because the sun was out and the daylight was just nice and strong in midday. But he came up with an idea. He said, "Let's play a game." And everybody kind of stopped and they looked at Squat-Toed Raven, but they kept working. But then he even came up with a more, what you might consider a clever idea. And he said, "We should play a game. Let's see who's the strongest person in the forest." And you know what? Everybody knew who the strongest person was. It was Mayok, grizzly bear. So they all looked over at Mayok and they were going to see if Mayok was going to play the game. But he just kept working. He was a very studious individual. And Raven noticed that the people were starting to look towards Mayok, and he saw that they really wanted Mayok to show his strength because Mayok was a very respected person. And everybody loved Mayok because he always helped people when they needed his help. So the other animals, they actually started talking to Mayok and they're saying, "Mayok, why don't you just show your strength? You can do it, buddy, go ahead." And you know what? Mayok, he did not want to disappoint his friends. So sure enough, he put down his work and he walked over to this really big stump, like a stump just as big as this, and he grabbed it and it was still in the earth, and he's like, and he threw the stump and it went flying across the forest. Everybody was cheering for Mayok. They were hooting and they were hollering. And everybody was happy for Mayok because he really was a strong person. And guess who was on top of his game? He was so happy because he finally had people's attention. That was Raven. Interestingly, there was one person that was not cheering, and that was Human. He just kind of stood there still. But Raven went on to the next animal, and he pointed his direction towards Hopate, deer. And he said, "Hopate, what can you do?" And before he can finish his sentence, Hopate, she leaped and she touched the ground and she went gracefully in the air. She must have jumped about 10 feet high. And when she touched the ground again for the second time, she jumped even higher. She was 12 feet in the air and she was so graceful. No one could jump as high as Hopate, and they clapped and they cheered for Hopate. But again, there was one person who did not cheer at all. And in fact, that was Skull Milk, Human. Not only was Human not cheering, but he actually had really big eyes and he was perspiring, he was starting to sweat, and he looked very nervous. But everybody else was completely immersed in the game. And Raven, being all slick and feeling all confident, he pointed towards Chickadee and he's like, "Chickadee, show us what you can do." And Chickadee, She was perched up on top of the Douglas tree, the Polani, and when she heard her cue, she literally dive bombed and she went at maximum speed. She flew down, and just before she hit the ground, she flew back up. And she flew all the way up to the top of the Polani, the Douglas fir tree. And when she landed on the last highest branch of the Douglas fir tree, she sang the most beautiful song your ears could ever hear. And she sang, and even though she was 100 feet high, you could hear her voice as clear as day. And by this time, the crowd was going wild. Everybody was cheering, everybody was happy. But guess who was not happy? Skalmilch. Skalmilch, his eyes were big, he was sweating even more, and his hands were starting to shake. And sure enough, Raven beelined right for Human, and he went straight to Human, and even with doubt in his voice, he kind of had his arms crossed, and he was looking all skeptical, and he's like, Human, what are you good at, Human? What can you do? What is your talent? And all of the other animals, they were noticing that Human was very upset, and they were kind of feeling that the game was starting to come to an end. And they did not want Human to feel upset, so they started to move away and go back to their work. But Raven, he would not relent. He just kept heckling Human and criticizing Human, and Human was getting more upset by the second. And finally, before anybody noticed, in a split moment, Human, he reached down, and it looked that he grabbed his tool, his weapon, his arrow, and in a burst of anger, he pulled his arrow back and he let it go. And that arrow flew across the forest, and it hit Bear right in the chest, and it hit Bear in the heart. And Bear fell to the ground. He collapsed, and Bear, Mayok, he died in the forest that day. The animals were so sad that they went deep into the forest. They left Human alone. And that's why to this day, Human does not live with the other animals, and that is why today we as humans live alone.